Hello, everyone. Uh, Welcome to tonight's episode. How does the unknown sculpt knowledge? How does light penetrate nothingness into manifestation? I'm going to begin with from a personal note. I remember having an experience in solitude in my loneliness, where after most of our lives as people are actually obsessed about ourself and its place in the whole self, which is the world. Pretty much a creature in a world is trying to fit into the ecosystem. It's trying to maintain the systems of its being. I remember I would have these long sessions where in 2014 when I started giving these talks, I would also when I was outside in nature, I would sit down and I would say certain mantras. I would say the mantra Om. There were other mantras I would say, but Om was primarily one. And the mantra was something like, I would have sessions like that, but I would say the Om to a point where I would no longer consider time. And in those moments, I would pretty much become a sort of uh, observer of through the stillness and silence of my moment. I would observe the sound and the movement, and I would, in some sense, recognize the transparency of time once an action is being done. Pretty much, I observed how my body's intelligence were affecting the thought. And whenever you may say a mantra or a chant, or pretty much any time you do anything, your attention, your conscious attention goes to exactly that activity. But your conscious attention, your attention is a beam. So it's like it's not just lights entering your eyes, consciousness is coming out of your eyes. As consciousness kind of extends out, there's a concentration on a singular point on any object, anything, any sound, any phenomena. Any phenomena you just begin zooming in on, or in some sense, your attention, you just begin watching. You begin watching how life is being in yourself, as yourself, you know. And what occurs is eventually it's like you step out of a state where the world has to be something, and you're in a state where it already is. Your contentment is uh, reached through self realization. You have to suddenly see how the game is being played, and then you feel better about how you're going to play the game. You know, somebody who doesn't know the rules of football, soccer, you know, when they enter, if they've never played the game, they will be in some sense intimidated by how the world's going to work in that game. But if they know the rules, if they know their position, if they understand the objectives of the environment, they, in some sense, pretty much all physical activity reminds you of the attention being moved. I say the word attention, guys, because you don't know how important it is. Most people just tell you to pay it. All activity is being watched in the present moment, which makes the doer attributeless to all the changing attributes being observed. There is a part of your moment of being right now that in order for you to acknowledge time, you have to be outside of time. The attention steers itself into itself. What that means is there arises through any sort of sincere practice and honest living, you find yourself in moments where you're not resisting who you are. When you don't resist who you are, it doesn't mean all the problems are going to go away. It just means the one seeing the problem has now understood that it's seeing it. Sometimes people's behavior when I walk in society, it's often I say society is a comedy and a tragedy. There's hilarious miracles occurring in society in regards to innovation. At the same time, there's tragic kind of states of people's lives. You know, when you walk in downtown Toronto, even though as a Canadian I'm honored to be in Canada, it just feels I this country is a great country, yet it is not as great as its weakness. And so when I walked in downtown Toronto, I saw defeated people. And defeated people means that there's two ways people's psychology can get influenced. It can get influenced by, like right now in your moment, whatever you own or whatever you think you are or whatever your story is, from this current moment in time, you can go two directions. As you progress through time, either things are going to gravitate to you towards more, or things are going to go away. The wise view is that in some sense you confront. The Buddha called these the three jewels. You're acknowledging impermanence, you're acknowledging imperfection, and you're acknowledging incompleteness. When you can acknowledge these, the ego has become like you evolve from being just a bewildered thought. The unknown sculpts knowledge based on an intention of attention to be. There's something. I remember somebody was being very poetic when I was having a very deep conversation about this with them, where they said it's like it's all becoming. That's life. You're just constantly becoming where everything is headed. You see, and everything seems to be headed in a sort of cyclical loop. There's a sort of cyclical quality to this universal sector, and at least how we experience it. Rhythms, cycles. We're not just we can't find happiness in a snapshot. Happiness is a sort of alignment with a rhythm of function alongside all that functions. The easiest way to find the unknown is to see what you don't know. When you look at your knowledge, you become humble because you see you don't know anything in a universe this vast. What you know is in your own experiential domain, as if we are not uh, multidimensional researchers yet. We have to study our own dimension. We have to step every person who's born. You're not like I'll tell you, the child that's born on this planet is not is born into a program, is born into a linguistic program, a sort of social cultural program. It has to respect these programs because these programs are building the civilization. Yet it must not get too caught into them or by them. Meister Eckhart, this Christian mystic from 1,000 years ago, he said something in the lines of the same eyes I see God are the same eyes God sees me. The awareness of his greatest idea or the greatest ability of the mind to conceptualize vastness. In every moment, you're a moment of being. How you're being a moment of being, usually in our mainstream, is defined by how you do things, so you're a doer. And in meditation and all this was to take the person towards being a seer of thought. In one of my talks, I gave this metaphor for human life. I said a child being born on this planet is like a comet or a meteor, hitting Earth. As the meteor hits the Earth, not the comet, but the meteor, the comet, I think evaporates. Like, doesn't get through the atmosphere. But anyways, once the meteor hits Earth, it has an impact. It makes a hole into the Earth. Imagine a big meteor hits. It goes into the Earth and makes a hole. In some sense, or let's say not just a hole, but like a big impact. You have to step out of the first wave of data that has shaped you. I noticed this. I noticed this when I asked advice from people when I was younger. I asked advice, and I'm like, where is their advice coming from? And I began to see the how human decency plays a big part in communication and knowledge. You know, and decency arises from how much the person is resisting who they are, how much they're actually being who they are. If you're unhappy, there is a sort of resistance going on. It's as if two intentions from the same heart are colliding. The most important thing about mysticism, or any sort of wonder about what lies beyond sensory dimension, is that you find contentment in the first dimension you're in. That means your past can be said to be segmented by time into levels of development. That means you as a creature on this planet have gone through phases where your actions have sculpted you. Your free will was the sort of unknown element that changed who you were based on what you did. So at the edge of knowledge is the unknown. At the edge of the unknown is knowledge. And intention is very important in the life process. A concept I speak about is the inner life. And The inner life is commonly unknown to the person because the inner life takes us towards the workings of imagination, like how we wonder imagination is here. Imagination requires space, so we can say the space where imagination takes place in is reality. When we realize that we are creatures, that the mind is evolving towards what is really real for it, that these are your decisions throughout the day. If somebody tells you something that's not real for you, you know, you won't do it. If somebody says go left and you have to go right, you know, so you won't listen. You see, our own instructor. A part of your mind generates instructions for its own survival, even if you're pushed to the brim. You know, let's say you find yourself in a very, I consider moments of life can be divided into two ways. Either they are chaotic in texture or they are ordered. Chaos and order means which way you're walking on the river. If you're walking against the river, the simulations of reality throughout the day are in some sense chaotic. That means it's like I'll give you an example. When I was younger, I didn't like picking up trash, just random trash from the ground. I couldn't do it. Okay, it felt like oh my god, how dare I take myself to that level of savageness I thought when I was young, you know? But then I shifted. Then after a few years, I shifted into a state where it didn't matter for me how the world saw my eyes because no, the world did not have my eyes. You see, I found a sort of um, untouchable confidence of my own experience because nobody had my view, and it's the same for everybody. You know, shyness exists because the certainty of the child has not yet come into themselves. They're dependent on other factors. A problem with that I felt religion could indirectly arise is that it makes people dependent on a savior, which means you're waiting for help. And I'll tell you, this world can be cruel. You can go into chaotic dimensions and ordered dimensions. Again, chaotic texture to the moment or an ordered texture to the moment. When there's an ordered texture to the moment, you're going as if you're going the direction of the river of life. Things are flowing. You, there's a sort of alignment, you being in the zone of how you live throughout the day. You know? What to do with a changing world? That's the question. The best answer so far is to change with it and have contentment. Have contentment of the alignment of your inner and outer. The whole point of death is that, in some sense, it's kind of suggesting there is an end, at least to the physical body. That means nobody needs proof to know that when the physical body hits a critical condition, it will eventually leave. It will decompose. The elements will not be held in that way. Okay? But nobody knows if the mind dies after death. And the reason nobody knows is because the mind is not an objective phenomenon. It's a subjective witness. That's how it comes across. I want to kind of dive into French philosophy here, and I want to share with you some quotes from an existential atheist, Jean-Paul Sartre. I want to share some quotes from him because I know that he was a person who he saw the essence in the surface of the phenomena. He saw that the surface was the essence of the phenomena. That was, in some sense, I find his accomplishment as a philosopher. He caught on to that. However, I wanna bring his words here. So hold on for a second. So some quotes from Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't know if I pronounced That's the last thing. He says there's only one day left, always starting over. It is given to us at dawn and taken away from us at dusk. He's pretty much saying your day is a waking state of being. It always recomposes itself, yet it is one moment among many, yeah, within many. He says life has no meaning the moment you lose the illusion of being eternal. And that's a profound statement, and I'm going to share my comment on it because the first ideas that kind of came to me when I read this right now is that what he's saying is that eternity is what seems to be the coding behind the effort of a surviving animal, as if something wants to be rather than not be, and this kind of impulse in our evolution of just being creatures that are like, okay, I'm being, so I'm going to continue being. I want to be. I want to live. You know. Yet at the same time, many values in one story of life change once the world becomes multidimensional. And so there requires a sort of eternal vision behind a temporary function. You know, it's as if like the velocity of our species, its direction is in eternity. You know, however, its speed is occurring through a temporal position. Jean-Paul Sartre says, it is only in our decisions that we are important. And he says God is absence. God is the solitude of man. What you consider real for you is a personal dimension of your experience that primarily you have access to unless you communicate it. In the absence of the body, we see the world is watching. We never die when we live in each other's memories, you know. You can say rather than thinking of life and death, think of manifestation percentage and lack of manifestation percentage. Jean-Paul Sartre says freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. He was an incredible observer, Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre says, I do not believe in God. His existence has been disproved by science. But in the concentration camp, I learned to believe in men. Interesting. I'm just going through the quotes, guys. Trying to see. Does not exist. Oh, this is a nice one. It says, every age has its own poetry. In every age, the circumstances of history choose a nation, a race, a class to take up the torch by creating situations that can be expressed or transcended only through poetry. Yeah, but true poetry is a reflection of the actual world. I don't see quotes about consciousness, though. So. He says, I must be without remorse or regrets, as I am without excuse. For from the instant of my upsurge into being, I carry the weight of the world by myself alone without help, engaged in a world for which I bear the whole responsibility without being able, whatever I do, to tear myself away from this responsibility for an instant. Our minds are much deeper than the stories of our bodies. Jean-Paul Sartre, I'm going to share one more quote. He says, temporality is obviously an organized structure, and these three so-called elements of time, past, present, future, must not be envisaged as a collection of data to be added together, but as the structured moments of an original synthesis. Otherwise, we shall immediately meet with this paradox. The past is no longer, the future is not. As for the instantaneous present, everyone knows that it is not at all. It is the limit of infinite division, like the dimensionless point. Yeah, something like the edge of the room that cannot see itself. Yeah. So think of it this way. I think that pretty much here, your relationship with what you consider to be real, that becomes reality. Your relationship with how reality has a relationship with the unreal, with imagination, with the unknown, with the unreal becomes imagination. Your imagination is like a child of the known and the unknown. Your subconscious is like a child, is the intersection of the known existence and the unknown existence. Okay? And so imagination has value not per se always for the content or just social value. Our imagination does not have just social value because if you don't communicate your imagination, you'll be like, what's the point of me having the thought if I don't do anything with it? So the thing is that most people think that imagination just has a social value, but it doesn't. It also has a very profound inner value where it's as if you're seeking the freedom of your external self, which is just luxury, wealth, power, all that show. And then there is the, in some sense, kind of life of the inner self. And the life of the inner self is the honest dimension of pure witnessing what you are. You cannot avoid it. You're honestly knowing yourself in the moment. You're honestly being yourself, you see? When you in some sense get too tangled into believing the thought, you then it's like there's so many people who suffer on this planet. They look at the sky and before they have this thought, like what kind of world is this am I living in where there's so much suffering? That person will become hopeless because they will feel that there are issues in our civilization occurring that nobody sees. And that is the worst chaos. The inner chaos is hopelessness. The outer chaos is just pain. So once you can become content with pain, once you can become content with hopelessness, depression has nowhere to go. It's as if you're okay, so nothing depresses you because you have acknowledged the problem as part of the answer. For me, humor is a very profound thing. Comedians don't understand it, most of them. That humor is an effort to escape normality. It is an effort to surprise. It is an effort to reveal. So I'm trying to think like if I had a son right now and my son asked me like, what is the point of the mind? Why do we have minds? I would probably give an answer that because existence needs a stage. It needs a, without an audience, the actor is empty. This is why a lot of people seek fame because their whole life they feel they're not being seen. And if they just mix that emotion with hard work, they'll just become this person who's constantly seeking something that was more of an inner issue than an outer issue. Because inner issues go with you wherever you go. It's as if like you have problems in the city and you try to escape your problems. And I'll give you an example. Imagine like you have work and you go into this incredible nature environment where it's like a paradise for you. You feel wow, this vacation is incredible. But if you stay too long into where the vacation is, you will eventually feel a sort of remorse. And this remorse would be as if what life am I contributing to? You're living for two things. You're living for your life and you're living for how your life has as much meaning as the life of everyone. Because if nobody was here, you would be the last being on earth. Your imagination of the world would for the first time be the same. If there was nothing and it was just you, we could say the world is your mind and the mind is your world. It is only in this conscious rhythmic evolution of coming into consciousness, then going back to sleep, waking up, da da da, and we keep going through this cycle. Okay? Because I was like, what's the point? The human being obviously is a sophisticated design. All animals on this planet are incredibly sophisticated. But when you look at the planet and you see all this emptiness and you see, as like Friedrich Nietzsche kind of said, God is dead, as if no longer the men of the world, like the ancients, could see the gods among the clouds, you know? Like the world had changed. The metaphysical structure of the world had changed because physics, in some sense, brought people to reality. And you don't understand, but I will tell you, instead of us having a lot of religious people and secular people being endlessly at war, let us just acknowledge each community is following ideas that were relevant to certain phases of history. Okay? For too long, ideas of I pretty much I'm this is gonna kind of sound strange, even though in these talks I talk a lot about just like where is all this humanity going? What's the point of all these human beings? Okay, what's the point of this existence, you know? And the thing is, if we don't have an instruction booklet like IKEA furniture, what will happen is we will attempt to make the thing ourselves. And so what that means is the value of life becomes in how you generate meaning. So truth becomes something you have to create. You know, you have to attain that state as the ancients thought. You know, it's something that you have to create rather than something that you have to find. So you create meaning rather than you find meaning. Trust me, like you can take like the same two people can walk into the temple, and for one of them the temple is just going to be like a room, and they'll be like, oh, you know, like a tourist, what a nice place, and the person leaves, and you suddenly see that building, for example, has a totally different value for the person who, like, I don't know, works in that building. You see, it's as if the temple is a place where the foulness of the mind is denied. That means the chaos, the chaotic shoes of the chaotic interpretation of the shoes that we find ourselves wearing, as if we take our shoes and we enter the temple. A temple is a place where you enter and you take off your subjective shoes, which means you become egoless. The ego is like a shirt you're wearing. Trust me, who you think you are right now, the idea you think you are, it's like a shirt you're wearing. It's something that exists in the domain of attention. That means if there's attention, then there's sight. And so the emergence of attention, how from sleep we wake up, is very profound. Because if somebody, like, you know, when a person sleeps and wakes up, if we had like a bird's eye view of that, we'd kind of see like as if like something becoming inactive and then suddenly becoming active. But this inactiveness and activeness of us going through sleep and waking up throughout the day, there's something unique about it. It's not just we wake up, it's that when we wake up in the morning, the world continues for something, for some sight that's here, for some intelligence. Let us not even, I call this, like my one of my greatest philosophical approaches to this life is honesty. Because without honesty, you cannot doubt. If you're not an honest man, you won't live in an honest, even if they give you an honest world, you can't live in it. This is why in when you kind of look at, you know, when you study psychology, you begin to see why is it that certain parents of kids in families, you know, especially in the lower class families, the father can't, like some fathers, imagine, like I've seen this also in movies. It was in that Will Ferrell movie Talladega Nights or something, but it's also a very occurring phenomenon in life where some parents feel ashamed to be in front of their children because they have, in some sense, their eyes have seen that side of them. Okay, and so the parent thinks that if I have hurt, like it's just natural, it's with human psychology. When one human being feels they have hurt another human being, they will feel guilt. When they feel guilt, anytime they're around that person, they feel like they're hurting them by being a lie to them. But let me tell you, we humans have tough skin. You know what that means is we're not jellyfish. You know, but when it comes to our emotional selves, everybody's a jellyfish. Like one tiny thing makes us just, you know, whimper away. For me, um, the easiest way to get out of hell is by finding a self that was never in it. And vice versa for heavenly, the heavenly notion, the easiest way to get to heaven is to find a way where how can I say it? It's like we build. Earth is built on in the heavens. Because I was like, it's very unique. When you look at this planet, a book I'm working on, it's going to be one of those hilarious books of mine. The viewers can read it when it comes out. It's called God Likes Spheres. And I began to notice there's a lot of spherical quality to the microcosm and the macrocosm. Microcosmically, our eyes are spheres, and the sun is a sphere, and the light of one sphere enters the light of a mini sphere. And I was like, whoa, what is this? What is this kind of like line between particles, let's say, right? Line between positions? You can have a relationship with your imagination where your imagination is just images. You can have a relationship with your imagination where you can isolate each sense. Your attention can go on just your hearing, and suddenly your whole intelligence shifts because the balance of your senses in regards to how much data they're bringing, as they shift based on your conscious attention to them, your identity shifts with the new data that arrives in your awareness. Jesus. Okay, this is a perfect song. For me, I think what happens is that the only way, you know, that I feel the ancient past will be content with the modern future, where it's as if, how would I say it? Your mistakes become due to foolishness, not due to an evil nature. You realize what has happened to you that you have disliked. Okay, it was like something approached you. There was a certain state of unique. I won't get into the details of it, but I found myself in a very unique moment where my consciousness was chemically altered, and not just chemically, just it was a very unique thing. But at the same time, in that state, I suddenly came to this realization that I can't identify with empty space. So the mind, as the Rig Vedas concluded, is a slave to the real. We can't conceptualize emptiness, so we find our attention taking shape through a subjective phenomena. Thoughts are tools for the ever-present being. There's a poet named Jalaluddin Maulana Rumi. He brings in his poetry a sort of unique metaphor for the pureness of true love, of actual love. A love where it's not just it has gone on a dimension where it's the whole being is being immersed in the moment. That means it's like what do I say? How he gave a profound metaphor, Rumi, this poet, from like a long time ago. He said it's like the moth and the candle flame. And this moth was flying around this candle flame, and suddenly its wing gets hit. And suddenly this poet gave personalities to these two, um, to the moth and the candle flame. In the moment where the moth kind of burns, it looks at the candle flame and says, How could you burn me? So many nights I flew around you so I would not keep you alone. So you were not alone. I sacrificed my life to kind of be around you. How could you burn me? And it's suddenly in that moment where the candle flame begins to speak and says, how could you? How I think similar to the modern Western relationship when one person cheats, it's as if it's that moment where two universes are slowly, it's as if you can say a relationship is two people building the same world to walk in. When there is a sort of discrepancy or a sort of disharmony in the relationship, that disharmony echoes into both individual worlds. So people, because we have this mind that always wants a backup system, they're thinking ahead. But when two people enter a relationship, the thoughts of what's going to happen ahead now has to be dictated with two minds. I'm getting too technical here, but I'm telling you, pretty much it's a sort of blind love, where at first you start off just thinking how you're behaving is how the world is, and then you suddenly begin to realize no, how the world is because how all behavior is building it. It's as if Mr. Within is like an old school Greek, like general kind of, pointing the sword uh, to the army to move ahead. And kind of the reason I'm using this metaphor because we're all marching against the unknown. Time is just the symbol we give to how knowledge gets fully encapsulated by the unknown. For me, some days it has been chaos has devoured me, but I have not died. I've continued. There have been days where order has, in some sense, flattered me. And there have been days where I realized after I have lived for myself, you begin getting emotions of a collective being. Right now, you're an individually conscious, personality bound creature. Your emotions are based on how thoughts move for you, the thoughts of yourself move for you. But eventually, we'll reach a point, I find every person just evolves naturally to that level, where they suddenly begin to see in a playful, nirvalka, how do you say Nirvikalpa Samadhi way, in a very playful Nirvikalpa Samadhi way. You reach a point where you stop taking your thoughts seriously and you finally come to the thought of self and you stop taking it seriously and you step out of the room of beliefs and you stretch your arms and you take a deep breath because for the first time you have realized that your attention does not need to be bound by thought. Thought is the color. The design is nature. The outline, the blueprint, like it's one of those things where they ask this guy like, who do you want to follow? And he said, I want to follow the world, And then the person who asked the question was like, this person didn't understand the question. Because the world is everybody's following the world. Pretty much it's I kind of create the system in this way. The best way to handle the moment is to stop, observe, stop, the start, rather than start, observe, and just stop. This is why I say if you care for the work you do, it energizes you. If you don't care for the work you do, you will come home tired, drained, and you will feel miserable because in the back of your mind, you're like, where's my energy going? Because we're creatures that function as personalities, I remember the first time I began considering beyond my sensory perception. It began I mean, it began since childhood, but it kind of developed. Um, I began wondering about other beings beyond the veil of thought and beyond, like other. I began wondering about multidimensionality, but an actual wonder, not like just like oh sci-fi, you know. Like it was. I was like, what if? What if we are multidimensional beings, and that's what the whole point of the idea of the soul was? It was to kind of show that there's more than just matter here, and so that's kind of evident because something moves matter into a purpose for itself. Whether the animal created the soul or the soul created the animal, whether consciousness brought forth matter or whether matter brought forth consciousness. We're always facing the unknown in our waking state. In our honest, fearless approach with the value that this species is worth living for efficiently, that we're here for one lifetime, what greater game is than that advancement of civilization? We all human beings, regardless of their differences, have one thing in common. We all care for a better future. Because it's one of those situations where, like, just like how somebody gives you like a free sample, like at Walmart or something, of like, no, like at Loblaws of like something, like some, I don't know, like cheese or something. They give you a sample of cheese. Similarly, it's something out of nowhere suddenly has become an opportunity, you know. And human beings, at least one good thing that comes from our greed is that we try not to miss opportunities. But now we're trying to not miss a selfless opportunity, an opportunity to transcend the individual level of existence and wonder about how the collective essence of the civilization is going to function. A part of us is nature. We cannot avoid. If nature gets angry, we can't do anything. We're on the shoulder of the giant. If the giant, like, you know, shoots us off, we're done. That means I can't tell nature what to do, but I could see that there's a free will here. And this free will is profound. And for most people, their free will is trapped and layered by so many files of different beliefs they hold. Yet the true explorer had to sacrifice the doubt of the exploration, had to sacrifice, like, you know, when Christopher Columbus kind of traveled, you know, Christopher Columbus, of course, his actions led to a tragedy on some level, but at the same time, this dude, before he did, before the Native Americans all died, before he had even finished the journey and found the new earth or whatever, you know, he was some guy in some community and some tribe, and he looked at everybody and he was like, who has gone the furthest? And he realized where no one had, and he just went. Regardless, I mean, in his mind, it seemed like he had a sort of a religious kind of context to his search. He was trying to find like heaven on earth on some sense. And he found heaven, but he could not see it. And that's the problem of power. It can be blind, and that's tragic because it will even destroy what is valuable for itself. True power is an inner sort of power. That inner sort of power comes from how honestly the vision can be present, and in some sense, how much it cares for life. If you don't care for life, then walk in a world of objects till all the objects break. But if you care for the evolution of the stories we tell ourselves, for the responsibility that we must hold, Diogenes, this ancient Greek philosopher, I said this earlier in the talk today, but he said, somebody asked him, where you're a citizen of? Where are you, like, where are you from, Dogmedes? And he, instead of saying a city or a town or a nearby village or whatever, he said the cosmopolites. He said the whole cosmos. He looked at the person and he not see the cosmos is watching, the whole cosmos is, and how our species functions suggests the elegance of its intelligence. That means there's two different kinds of warriors. There's ones who want to show, who want to fight, and there are those warriors who instantaneously, in some sense, end the war. It's kind of like how in video games you have the assassin character and you have like kind of like the barbarian warrior character. And the main difference is that one one wants one is on the surface, the other is not. One can say the application of the inner findings of the mind to the outer world is instantaneous. Your mind, like when you look at a lighter, like right now I'm looking at a lighter, and when I look at this lighter, it's instantaneous. The word, the concept, what it is, it has already been kind of shaped as a thought, as a belief of, upon language. So it was the sophistication of the concentration of this evolutionary creature. And so let me tell you, it's too natural. That's why it was as if like just like how you plant a seed of a tree in the soil and you just know that tree is gonna work based on its design and kind of like uh, the way the cells of the seed are, you know. So in some sense, it's similar with human consciousness. The ability of it was, it's as if the best thing you can do is, you know how we say the garden of paradise, the garden of heaven? Now think of the garden of the heavens as if the whole cosmos is a sort of garden. And so once an intelligent phenomena has an ability to plant flowers of conscious civilizations upon different universes, perhaps it's probable even on a bacterial level that extraterrestrial kind of cells somehow found their way on the surface of the planet, as if cosmic dust being hitting the earth. It's too designed. That's the issue. This is why you can't rule out the um, creator creation dynamic. It's too designed. It's as if not only did the ape evolve itself, its hand size to be the size of an apple, but the apple tree evolved for the apple to be the size of the hand of the being. You know, it's as if it's too. It's like we're an uncommon program in a common world of nature. We are very strange, but at the same time natural beings compared to all other species on this planet. And believe it or not, I find that if the ape, the chimpanzee or whatever, had an ability to evolve into a level of speech, you can profoundly say that other animals have it too. Okay, and it doesn't have to do just with brain size. It has to do where the spontaneous and energetic presence and attention of their being arises from. It has to do with the intention of the creature. Think of it this way, as if like when you drive a car, you drive it until you get to your destination. If you haven't gotten to your destination, you'll still drive your car until you get to the destination. So many life forms they're kind of their consciousness is driving their biology towards a certain destination, a sort of biological program based on genetics and DNA. Okay, so DNA is the blueprint to the biological phenomena. But so pretty much we can say we are attributeless awareness, being consciousness as it drives a temporary biological vehicle. There's many ways we can describe it, but the way the one that's looking out through your eyes right now, the real you, the way it stands, is very non-conceptual compared to how the ideological you and how the thought of you stands. So I'm saying this, guys, for the first time. I'm starting to notice we are not that evolved, and that's why we can notice the mysteries. Plato tells us time is the moving image of eternity. For him, the illusion was temporary, the truth was eternal. But in our modern age, it's the opposite. Truth is temporary and the illusion is eternal. Trust me, these two sentences I just said, they dictate all of philosophy. All the stories of the efforts of living creatures to evolve beyond themselves. There's a story of Rumi where he was like in his 20s reading a science book of a time, a very unique book, rare book, by a fountain, you know? And this is like, I don't know, 800, 900 years ago. And it is actually in that range. And so what happens is Rumi's reading this, and in that culture, this is occurring in kind of like in a Sufi culture, you know. And out of nowhere, this kid who's reading this science book by the fountain, suddenly this whirling, like this, not whirling, but like this spiritual wild man appears, this enlightened kind of dervish that would go from different towns to towns, you know. The spiritual wild man, who is much older, comes to walks up to Rumi. His name is Shams Tabrizi, this spiritual wild man. He's in some sense Rumi's guru. And now, so what happens is that he looks at this kid and he says, "Hey kid, what are you reading?" And the kid says, "This is this newest science book of the time. Nothing you would understand, random old man who came out of the woods." You know? And of course, Shams Tabrizi is a very, not literal, but very wise being. Okay? And he looks at Shams, and he looks at Rumi, and he just takes the book, because Rumi has responded in arrogance, and throws it in the water. And Rumi suddenly snaps out of his arrogance, out of his pride and ego, and looks at this guy and he says, "Do you know what you have done? You have destroyed the newest knowledge of the time. There's no photocopy machines yet, you know." And Shams Tabrizi looks at him and says, He takes the book from the water and gives it to Rumi, and it's completely dried. And he says knowledge that could be wiped with water is no knowledge at all. And just, knowledge that could be wiped with water, words that could be wiped with water. The value is in the experiential attainment, the integration of experience in some sense with the world that's occurring, the inner experience with outer, something like that. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Tonight's episode was a long one. I honestly don't know where all these talks are going, but I have a feeling that nature knows, and nature knows what we do not. Our heart beats with an intelligence that, in some sense, uh, does not require thought. Our thoughts seem to be ascribed to a certain domain of our free will. Our free will has limits. And by having limits, it begins to doubt the limitless, to just keep itself in its limitation. Sometimes limited people want to keep limitations alive because they would lose their identity. This is why thieves, crooks, and the dishonest folk of this world, they will in some sense want to have the illusion maintained, because if the illusion was suddenly broken, they would have to confront who they knew they should have been but they weren't being. Your intuition is a friend of your conscience. Your conscience is how the inner, the more simpler self can see how intelligence should function, rather than the more complex self, complex intelligence. Because whenever a person lies, they have to be two people at once. That's the issue. It's a clutter. It's a sort of ignorance to inner clarity, mental clarity. And all art forms, the act for 10,000 hours, and you will in some sense be you will have seen the process to know it well. For temporary creatures will always have eternal dreams. You can't stop it. I remember hearing the late Christopher Hitchens speak about how Freud, the psychologist, Freud in some sense suggested that man will constantly, how can I tell you, fear keeps the program running, it powers the illusion. When you ride fear, you begin cultivating honest strength. Listen to the intelligence of your world, and listen to it from within. You're here to be you, and the unknown will endlessly, till the end of time, constantly resculpt knowledge. What I say today is what this moment has to share. Truth is too dynamic. Truth is like, you can't read the Wikipedia description of skydiving. It's like actual skydiving. That's the truth. It's an experiential engagement of the utmost intensity, where the intensity of the experience breaks the previous thoughts of identity that being had. So there's a sort of profoundness in that domain. Thanks for listening, and once the mind is